So, hello, I'm Thomas, co-founder of Masters, and today I'm sitting with Kevin Indig. So, hello, Kevin, how are you doing?
Hey Thomas, good to be here. I'm doing well, thank you.
Perfect. So, just to give a little intro about what you do and who you are, I will try to do my best to introduce you to our viewers. So, currently you worked as director of SEO at Shopify. You also had experience working for G2 as a VP of content and SEO, and also for Atlassian as direct head of technical SEO, I think. But on the side, you also worked, you present in different conferences, and you have your own YouTube channel and mailing list, TechBound, I think, where you share your knowledge and experience on SEO topics and also startup. But you also mentor, right, in for startups.
Yeah, that's correct. I think that should cover it for the most part.
Well, I think I've heard from a video you posted with somebody that you got into SEO because of gaming, sort of.
Yeah, that's good research. The way this came to be is that I was an avid computer gamer as a kid and as a teenager, and when I must have been 13, maybe 12 years old, broadband internet became available in Germany. So I was born and raised in Germany, and when I was a teenager, we had access to broadband internet, and that means that anything online started to take off, and of course, especially online gaming. Now, at the time, I played in a group of friends. We played games like Counter-Strike, StarCraft, Warcraft, Diablo, those kind of games. And we played tournaments as well, but if you wanted to apply for a tournament, you needed to have a website. And so I became the guy to figure out how to build a website, and that led me to teach myself a little bit of HTML, CSS, Photoshop, and that then got me on the bandwagon of online marketing, SEO, search engines, the internet. And so that's where everything started, basically.
Okay, well, interesting story, definitely, from gaming to let's say SEO, not really common, I will say. And so fast forward till today, now you are working at Shopify. And so what is it that you do nowadays at Shopify?
That is a good question. My official title is Director of SEO, but I do a little more than SEO. So the way that I would title it is probably organic growth. And at Shopify, in the growth organization, we have a matrix-like structure, meaning that you have a craft and you have what we call a mission. So craft could be SEO, conversion optimization, any paid channels, but then the mission is basically a group of cross-functional teams that go after the same goal. And so I'm responsible I lead the SEO mission, which means I don't just have a team of a bit over 20 SEOs, probably 30 by end of the year, but I also have a team of engineers, data scientists, operations people, designers. There's a big team that goes after anything that has to do with SEO. And our main priority is to bring more merchants to Shopify. So we're responsible for acquisition, and a tiny bit of my time goes into SEO features of the product or making sure the product is SEO friendly, but it's not my main mandate. That's more, I don't want to say it's a hobby, but it's almost like a side hustle within the company. There's a small group of SEOs who are very passionate about SEO and kind of inform the product organization on potential SEO features we could build or ways we can make the product especially SEO.
Okay, I see. So I understand you would like to do more the later that you explained, in fact, optimize Shopify for better SEO.
Yeah, exactly. That's a small kind of side hustle, so to speak.
I see. Interesting. So also I was watching a couple of videos you published and you participated in, and I think one of your last video on your channels that you made an AMA. And you replied a question and you say to somebody something that SEO is competitive because the barrier to entry is lower than ever before. So maybe you can expand to this statement and tell us a little bit more.
We live in a time where anybody can create content easily. That can be quick remix of a TikTok video, but it can also be just starting a blog or an email list. And the result of that is that there's more content on the web than ever before. And that means that the competition is higher than ever before. And also means that you continuously have to step up your game. Mediocre content basically is invisible on the web. In fact, there are studies by Ahrefs and SEMrush and other companies who have shown that the majority of content on the web has 0 visits, 0 backlinks, 0 social shares. Basically, it's completely invisible. And so you deal with this huge mass of content. The barrier to entry is lower and lower, and the requirements to stand out and be visible are higher and higher. And so it's a very, very interesting dynamic of the web, which basically means that as a company, if you don't have something that's truly outstanding, or you have a hugely popular brand, it's really hard to attract business through just content or content marketing.
Well, I think I have a question further down the line exactly about this, where to prioritize. But to follow what I planned, so I think SEO can be technical, but also strategic. And this is what you mentioned in essence when we listen to what you're speaking about in TechBound, but also in conferences. But when we think about SEO for companies, I think there is a question of how and when maybe to invest in it. And obviously, I think it depends on the resource the company has. The question turns into, should it be in-house SEO or outsourced? And well, I think, maybe you can tell us more because you know the subject.
Yeah, Thomas, you did your homework here. It is a good question, and there are a couple of factors that can help you make that decision better. First of all, you have to understand how important SEO as a channel is for your company. If it is a substantial driver of business, I recommend to take most things in-house, build in-house expertise, knowledge, a strong performing team. If it's a side channel, if it's something that is a nice cherry on top, it's totally fine to outsource it, right? I think the importance dictates how you want to approach SEO. And then, of course, the more important SEO is for the company, the bigger your department, the more people you should have working on it. At G2, for example, SEO was the main driver of business and still is. And that means I had a team of, almost 35 people creating content, optimizing the marketplace from a technical perspective, and so on and so on. And it's a very similar story now at Shopify. SEO is hugely important. It's a very cost-efficient, probably the most cost-efficient channel that exists. And so we take it very seriously with a big headcount investment. The question is also, what functions to outsource. I think, for example, that you can outsource content creation. That can work really well. You can outsource something like graphic design or just graphics in general. You can outsource market research. The question is always, what is the short-term cost and benefit of outsourcing, and what's the long-term cost and benefit of outsourcing? Short-term, mostly it's that you can move fast. It can even be more cost-efficient to outsource in some cases. Long-term, that means so that the cost is you basically don't own that expertise in-house. So you always want to differentiate between short-term and long-term impact.
I see. And so, well, I guess you asked a little bit, you covered it specifically about the cases when we speak about outsourcing and in-housing for SEO. But when it comes to, let's say, e-commerce, and because now you're working at Shopify, and we know with COVID that there is a lot of new merchants that are coming online that were never here, and I think we mentioned something like 10 years leap forward in the industry. I think you can confirm that, right?
Yeah. For sure.
And what will be actually the implications of SEO if we consider, let's say, B2C and e-commerce?
Yeah, that's very interesting. So you set the stage right there. We do see this huge wave of merchants coming online, and there's a couple of differentiations. A lot of the businesses have existed offline, and the pandemic forced them to go online. And then there's also a wave of people who have never had a business before, but during the pandemic started one to try it out, or because they had time, or they had a bit of money on the side, whatever. And so it's interesting because on the one hand, that means that there's a vastly growing ecosystem of merchants, which gives birth to a whole other side of that ecosystem, which is service providers, like consultants, designers, freelancers, but also app creators, theme creators, and so on. There's this whole ecosystem, which is very interesting. From an SEO perspective, the challenge is that you will inevitably have quite a lot of businesses that directly compete with each other. So in the offline world, right, if you think about your local businesses, say there's a local candle store, right? You're selling candles in a town. You can multiply that across millions of towns theoretically, right? You're not competing with a candle store in the next town. You compete with your local town, your local market. On the internet, that is very different from an SEO perspective. On SEO is a zero-sum game, right? There are only 10 results. Sometimes there are a couple more, but basically it's 10 results. And so it means only 10 companies can technically compete for the term candles or buy candles online. So the surface area is very small, but the competition is very large. And so as a business, especially as a small business, you have to ask yourself, what is the market that I can compete in online when it comes to SEO? Social media is different. It doesn't have that same zero-sum component to it. But in SEO, there are only so many companies that can go after juicy keywords like sneakers, candles, scents, whatever you sell online. So you have to find your niche, and you have to figure out how to compete in SEO, right? It's this interesting dynamic where on the one side you have a ton of opportunity at low cost, but on the other side you have this huge competition. And that leads to very interesting dynamics over time.
You are kind of teasing where I'm going out with this, because recently I spoke with Kai Ranali from Facebook IQ. And at Facebook IQ, they make analysis, and they draw insights from the data they have at Facebook, but also third-party data. And from the research, they uncovered that from now they say products find people and not the other way around, more than the other way around. So I guess that for certain categories of product and services, you mentioned sneakers, candles, we can think of something else. It might mean that, SEO is a cherry on top. Like it's better to look forward to another type of content, influencer marketing, social media.
I 100% agree with the view that you have to think holistically about selling online, and especially acquisition channels. These things don't happen in isolation, right? People who search on Google, probably also on Instagram, probably also on Facebook, Twitter, maybe TikTok. So you have to, it's not something you can completely look at in isolation. So what that means for you is that, yes, you kind of have to find your niche. You have to find kind of your story. You have to learn how to differentiate your product. It's not enough to just have like a white label product. It's not like if you sell a commodity, you better have a way to differentiate. And as I mentioned, there's a lot to learn from different channels as well. Like you can transfer some lessons that you get through social media to SEO, for example, like maybe some comments or maybe some questions that people have about the product. So it's really difficult to look at these channels in isolation. And you also want to understand, where you might have a competitive edge. Maybe some of your competitors are very present in SEO, but they're not present on Facebook at all, right? And at the same time, you have a huge audience on Facebook. So you want to think strategically and holistically about your business, understand where you can compete, where you might have a competitive advantage, and how to stick out from the noise, right? The thing to remember is that it's all about attention these days. And when you search on Google, there's a lot of attention that you can capture. On social media, you fight and compete much more for attention because there's so many different things pulling people in different directions. And so you need to understand, where can you capture attention the best right now, especially as a young business, but then also over the long term, where can you build a moat? Where can you establish yourself and kind of really like lock people in and make your brand part of their
I see. It does make sense, and I'm actually thinking of inspiration and how people or product find people. This is what I mentioned. We speak about social media, that there is a lot of let's say also competition over there, that your eyes basically are being attracted by many signals for go do this, look at that, etc. And but maybe there is like an opportunity for, let's say, more visual search, like with image SEO, or if we think about Pinterest, for instance. And maybe it's going in this direction. Let's say less words and more visual.
Yeah, no doubt it's going to that direction. The evolution of media over time and the way that we store and share information is certainly going into more visual aspects. People still read books, people still read blog articles, but if you want to capture attention at broad scale, especially on the consumer side, videos work really, really well. I mean, if you just look at the trends of the biggest, where like most attention, I would say these days, is probably on social networks. And just look at the most popular social networks, so all video networks, right? TikTok, clearly video. And then also Instagram is moving more towards video. Don't forget that Instagram was a photo filter and then became a photo app and now becomes a video app, right? Where video has dominance. YouTube is another one of the biggest platforms out there. It's all about video. And it will probably stay like that for a long time. Even in SEO, video is becoming more important, where Google is now able, through new technologies like MUM, M-U-M, to pull out information from different types of media, whether it's text, images, video, and combine them to give an answer, right? So yes, the future of media is definitely richer, and whatever you do, I think video is a great, maybe the best way.
Okay, I see. So yeah, I mean, this is I think true that many people on YouTube see that people will say this is the right moment, or the right moment has been maybe before, but this is never too late to go and do more video content, but it's because it will be becoming even more prominent in the future. And what I heard and what I saw actually is that people mention about YouTube and SEO that it's like maybe even more than YouTube, it adds up over time. Whereas if you consider content on Facebook, content is like more, it has a lifetime, which is shorter. But coming back to SEO and specifically about something that you mentioned, I think in a video, that people in SEO, they have actually trouble to explain the ROI of SEO. So maybe, if you are an agency out there, or if you are in an SEO, working for a company as a SEO manager, what would you recommend people how to praise for SEO and how to prove the ROI?
The important thing when it comes to ROI from SEO is to understand your business model and put ROI in the context of that business model. What I mean by that is you cannot apply the same ROI formula from, say, an e-commerce site to a media site that makes money through ads. It has to be a different formula, and it has to be a different way to look at SEO completely, right? So media, say, publish a site that makes money with ads, the number of sessions or page views is so much more important than the number of sales or conversions. There basically is no other conversion than an eyeball. That's conversion. So, that has a fundamental effect on how you structure the site even. That's why you often see image galleries spread over several pages. It's because each click is another page view, which means you can sell that to advertisers. Whereas to e-commerce, it's a completely different approach. So the ROI has to be in line with your monetization model, your acquisition model, and your product as a whole. Also, the ROI formula for SEO really needs to take into account the time component. Paid media or paid channels they provide almost instant ROI. Whereas SEO takes a while to ramp up and it takes a while to show impact from SEO. So we're talking about completely different approaches here. And again, I think, you want to come up with your own formula. What does that look like for you and for your company specifically? It will also mature and change over time. So very established brands have a shorter time to impact or returns from SEO. Whereas completely new companies, startups, they have a much, much longer time to impact from SEO. So all this context needs to be taken into account. And then you kind of want to start with a basic calculation of ROI and then feed that model with data and lessons over time. So the first time you define ROI from SEO, it will probably be less accurate than, say, the 5th or 10th time. So it's a model that grows over time with the company and that constantly, quote unquote, changes. Doesn't mean that you cannot predict a certain ROI from SEO, but it means that there are a lot of moving parts and a lot of factors that might change over time, and that means that your formula and equation might also change.
And so also coming to, you said that we cannot predict, and I think this is something you mentioned, I read or I listened to you. You said that SEO people don't talk enough about traffic volatility. So what is traffic volatility, and why do you think people don't talk enough about this?
It's a harsh reality to accept. Google is getting really smart, and smart to a degree where it's basically impossible to reverse engineer, right? There was this time, probably 5, maybe 10 years ago, where the changes Google made had such a strong impact that we could clearly identify what the change was, just simply by looking at the impact of websites, right? We can take third-party tools, and 10 years ago, we could take third-party tools. We could look at all the sites that lost or gained traffic when an update rolled out. We could see what they have in common and then make assumptions of what the change was. That's not possible anymore today. There's so many factors at play that the human mind cannot capture that, right? Like, the human mind is very good at linear changes, very bad at exponential changes or understanding that. And so Google has become so smart and the algorithm is so good that we cannot really cognitively process anymore what's happening there. And it's at the same time, Google constantly iterates their algorithm to look for different signals and to get a better understanding of what people are actually looking for. An example is when you look for, say a medical supplement, right? Say vitamin D. It might be that today Google thinks that you want to learn about the effects of vitamin D, and it could be that tomorrow Google thinks that you want to buy vitamin D, and that will completely change the results that are popping up. And if you're one of those results, it could mean that you lose traffic tomorrow. It could mean that you gain a lot of traffic tomorrow, and there's nothing that you did. There's nothing that you changed on your end. And that's what I mean by traffic volatility. It means that the harsh reality that we all have to face is that we're not 100% in control of our organic traffic. A big part is up to Google's interpretation of what users really want. And there are different assumptions of how Google measures that. It could be what results people click on, how they refine their searches. It's actually not that complicated, especially when you have billions of searches to better understand what people actually want. And Google uses a technology called RankBrain. They've been using that since 2016. And so for the last 5 years, we've mostly been lying to ourselves, thinking that we can completely control organic traffic, while in reality, it is not completely in our hands. And that's what I mean with traffic volatility. As a second order effect, it also means that we have to manage expectations. We have to find backup plans for what happens when Google, quote unquote, changes its mind. And we have to plan with a much greater deviation or much greater volatility in mind when we think about organic traffic.
Okay. So it joins up with maybe traffic seasonality and the fact that Google is trying to understand what you're looking for and gives you an answer. And this is something we saw is, I think it's OpenGraph, right? That now you have the answer. You have even more media than just the answers right on Google.
Yeah, it's crazy. There are even different results based on whether you use a mobile device or a desktop device, right? So this is another way to segment results and another way to slice the way you think about SEO. So seasonality is certainly something that you need to take into account. Where people might search from, what context they might be searching from, what questions they have. You mentioned that Google gives more and more answers in the search results in different ways. One of them is to maybe show more video and bring people to YouTube, which is also part of Google. But also questions that are being displayed right in the search results. There's a module that Google likes to use called People Also Ask, where they show related questions to your search query. And that's something, for example, that we've noticed increasing a lot over the last couple of weeks. So it seems that this works really well for Google. And anecdotally, I can say that these questions draw a lot of clicks from users. So it's a reality that we have to face, which means that it could be that organic results get less and less clicks and more people click on these SERP features, as I call them, that Google shows, like a People Also Ask box, like maps, like shopping ads, all these augmentations of the Google search results. And so the best thing that we can do is to get a finer understanding of what is even going on in the search results. Part of that is just seeing for yourself, right? Part of that is just make sure you Google your most important keywords from time to time and see what all the things are that are happening. What are all the different elements that can draw away attention from my search result? And do I see, even just anecdotally, an impact on my search traffic? But if a more professional way to look at that is to use a third-party rank tracker, like there are so many out there, right? From SEMrush, Ahrefs, Rank Ranger, Right. There are many tools out there that are really good. And use a third-party rank tracker to track your click-through rates on keywords, track your rankings, and track SERP features to just be on top of what is going on in the search results. Because again, this can change tomorrow. Also, it is different on mobile and desktop, and it might depend where people.
Yeah, exactly. This is actually what I wanted to say. That also Google is rolling out features, and depending on region, so you might not have exactly the same thing or the same results available at the same time. Well, this is interesting. I see definitely that. This is what you do. So you are definitely monitoring the changes happening at Google, and I know because I watched your talk when you were at AdWords conference that you made quite deep study on how Google was basically acting within the pandemic. And I noted one of the key findings at the time that I noted was that you mentioned that Google is more radical and its punishments are harsher. Do you have any example of this?
Yes, absolutely. So I already talked about algorithm updates and how Google might reassess what quality means and what people are searching for. And because there are so many, because the barriers to entry are so low and there's so much more content out there and competition is harsher, that also means that when Google makes fine adjustment, that way more sites, like quote unquote, suffer under that adjustment, right? It also means that even if Google determines that a site is just a little bit better than another site, then another site might lose a lot of traffic simply because a lot of its keywords go from, say, position 1 down to position 4 or 5. And that has a huge impact. So the small adjustments that Google makes scale with the size of the web and scale with competition. And so that's what I mean when I say that Google's updates are becoming harsher. It's simply that the small adjustments have a bigger impact. when I looked at the pandemic and how Google changed, I was lucky to get a lot of data from two companies. One of them is SEMrush, and they provided me traffic data of the 1,000 largest domains on the web worldwide. And the other one is Rank Ranger, which tracks SERP features, and they gave me keyword data SERP feature data of over 100,000 keywords globally. And so I took quite a couple of hours to dive deep into the data set. And what I found is, a couple of things. Some of them we already talked about, which is that there's a difference, that Google iterates on SERP features over time, might change their mind. It's also different on mobile and desktop, and it's different from country to country. But what I also found is that more SERP features generally mean fewer clicks to websites, right? So there is some sort of a cannibalization going on. And that during the pandemic, Google showed quite a lot more SERP features for a lot of queries just to answer people's questions, right? Which makes perfect sense. Questions like, what's the COVID level or COVID infection level in my city? Or what's the latest news on COVID vaccines? Google really doubled down on showing more answers right in the search results. Google built own new features showing COVID statistics. And of course, it had quite a lot of demand. But as a result, fewer traffic went to websites because Google took a stronger stance on showing answers right in the search results. That has calmed down a little bit more since the beginning of 2021. But it was very interesting to see how fast Google reacts almost in real time to events that happen in quote unquote.
Definitely. For anybody, this last year was not common, and even for Google was not common. But it's crazy to see that this discipline, SEO is, it's not getting easier, definitely over time. And I think today it's much more about testing than before. Before you could say, okay, you have the good practice book, you apply the rules, and you are happy with the results. Somehow you can be okay. But now there is a lot of testing going on. But what do you do if you don't have time or resources to do testing and experimentation?
It gets harder for you to win if you don't have time for that. Basically, what you have to do is look at SEO like a product and develop it very rapidly, almost with a constant feedback loop, and be very agile about things so you can react to these changes that we mentioned coming up very quickly and sometimes without any notice or any warning. And so if you don't have any resources to test, one thing you can do is look at the most successful websites in your vertical or even on the web and see how they evolve over time. You can look at their performance, right? Like the tools that I mentioned before will show you any site's performance on the web, and that might help you to see, hey, this site has been gaining a lot of traffic. Why is that? And then you can trim and dig deeper into the keywords that they're ranking for, and then see how is their keyword performance going. Then you look at the pages that rank for these keywords. You see, okay, what are they doing on their pages? What does the experience look like? What is the content that they show? So there is still a component of reverse engineering in SEO. It's not completely dead, but it has to be much more on a case-by-case basis, because one thing that I learned is that Google adjusts the ranking signals based on the search query. So let me give you an example. When you look for something in the finance or insurance space, or say like a mortgage, right? That's a query where Google might value a secure connection much stronger than say in the travel space, right? Where they maybe evaluate or value images much more stronger, or the content or videos. So Google is able to basically put together a set of expectations based on what you search and based on what makes sense in the context of your search. And so by looking at the best performing sites that you compete with, or the best performance sites in your vertical, and looking what they do, you might be able to learn something for yourself and apply that. It's a bit fuzzy, like don't get me wrong, it's a bit subjective for sure. But that kind of market research, which is really unique to SEO, can help you to make good choices even without your own testing.
So you use other testing abilities to basically see how you can compete and to do what works for you. Exactly, right?
Yes. You can also do, like there's some pseudo tests that you can run, basically before and after tests. It doesn't always have to be super scientific. I mean, any SEO test is a quasi experiment anyway. And so simply by being a bit more diligent and disciplined about tracking the results when you make a change, and then rolling the change back and then seeing if your traffic goes back to baseline, that in itself can be enough to do some SEO testing.
So first, we start with just following people in your industry that actually own the topic, and surround yourself with experts. Even if these are not in-house, you just follow them. So you are among them, right? We can say you are an expert in SEO. So what about following you, right? Because you write a lot of articles, you produce a lot of content on SEO. And also, I have to say that I really liked watching and reading your content, because it's bound to the business side of SEO. It's technical, but it's also strategical, I would say, the way you are explaining it. And I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Thomas. It's very kind of you.
Okay, so I think it's a nice conclusion. I really had a good time speaking with you. It was really my pleasure and honor to host you today. And I guess we'll go to our days right now.
Likewise. Yeah, it was great being on. Thanks for the questions, and thanks for coming so prepared for the conversation.
Bye-bye, Kevin. See you.